Madagascar is a 2005 American computer-animated comedy film that was produced by DreamWorks Animation and distributed by DreamWorks Pictures. The film was directed by Eric Darnell and Tom McGrath, two filmmakers who would go on to shape the entire Madagascar franchise across multiple sequels and spin-offs. Madagascar was written by Mark Burton and Billy Frolic, and it was made in the United States, with DreamWorks Animation handling the production out of their studios in Glendale, California. The film was released theatrically on May 27, 2005, and it quickly became one of the studio's biggest hits of that year, eventually spawning sequels, television series, a stage show, and an entire media empire built around its four central characters. Madagascar was created at a time when DreamWorks Animation was trying to establish its own identity separate from Pixar, leaning into fast-paced humor, pop culture references, and a more irreverent tone compared to the more sentimental style associated with its biggest competitor. The film became a defining example of that approach and helped cement DreamWorks as a major player in the animated film industry throughout the 2000s. The story of Madagascar follows a group of pampered zoo animals living in New York City's Central Park Zoo, where they have spent their entire lives in comfort, safety, and blissful ignorance of what life would actually be like in the wild. At the center of the story is Alex the lion, a confident and charismatic performer who is treated as the star attraction of the zoo, adored by crowds and completely content with his structured, cushioned existence. His closest friend is Marty the Zebra, who begins the film feeling restless and increasingly curious about what lies beyond the walls of the zoo, particularly wondering what freedom in the wild might actually feel like. Rounding out the group are Melman the Giraffe, an anxious hypochondriac who is constantly worried about his health, and Gloria the Hippo, a level-headed and warm-hearted friend who often serves as the voice of reason among the group. Their comfortable world is thrown into chaos when Marty, driven by his growing desire to experience life outside captivity, escapes from the zoo on the night of his 10th birthday in order to see what existence in the wild might be like. Alex, Melman, and Gloria set out after him in an attempt to bring him back before anyone notices he is missing, but their efforts to retrieve him lead to public chaos throughout the city, and the four friends are eventually captured by animal control. Concerned about the safety risk the animals now pose after their escape, the zoo officials in New York decide it would be best to relocate them to a wildlife preserve in Kenya, hoping to reintroduce them to a more natural environment. However, during the ocean crossing, a group of mischievous penguins who have been planning their own escape to Antarctica hijack the ship, and in the resulting struggle, the crates containing Alex, Marty, Melman, and Gloria are knocked overboard and wash up on the shores of Madagascar instead of reaching their intended destination. What follows is the central comedic and emotional journey of the film, as the four zoo animals, who have never had to survive on their own, must adapt to their unfamiliar surroundings on the island. Marty finally gets to experience the freedom he always wanted, reveling in the openness of the island and quickly bonding with a group of wild lemurs led by the eccentric and self-important King Julian, who rules over his lemur subjects with exaggerated grandeur while living in constant fear of being hunted by the mysterious and feared fossa creatures that inhabit the island. As the film progresses, a major shift occurs within Alex, whose long-dormant predatory instincts as a lion begin to resurface the longer he spends away from the structured environment of the zoo. Deprived of the regularly delivered meals he was used to receiving in captivity, Alex grows increasingly hungry, and this hunger slowly starts to awaken primal urges he had never experienced before, urges that put his closest friends, especially Marty, in genuine danger. This transformation becomes the emotional core of the film, exploring themes of identity, nature versus nurture, and the tension between comfort and authenticity, all wrapped inside a fast-paced comedy aimed primarily at family audiences. Melman and Gloria, meanwhile, try to help maintain peace among the group while also adjusting to their own new reality on the island, with Melman's hypochondria taking on new dimensions now that he no longer has access to any medical attention, and Gloria continuing to serve as the emotional anchor holding the friendship together during a moment of real crisis. The King Julian subplot offers much of the film's comedic energy, as his desperate attempts to use the newly arrived New York animals as protection against the fossa creatures leads to some of the most memorable sequences in the movie, including musical numbers, celebratory island rituals, and a very particular obsession with the concept of a barbecue that plays into a running joke throughout the film. Eventually, the group must find a way to reconcile Alex's reawakened wild instincts with the deep friendship the four animals share, all while trying to figure out how they might eventually make their way back home to New York. The film builds toward a climax involving the penguins, who have been quietly working on repairing their hijacked ship throughout the entire story in the background, setting up their own arc that would carry forward into the franchise's future installments. By the end of the film, the four friends come to terms with who they truly are, learning to balance their zoo-raised personalities with the wild instincts and environment they now find themselves surrounded by, all while strengthening the bond of friendship that brought them together in the first place. The voice cast of Madagascar features a lineup of well-known performers who helped define these characters for an entire generation of viewers. Ben Stiller voices Alex the lion, bringing his recognizable comedic energy and charisma to the role of the confident, showboating zoo star who is forced to confront the wild side of his nature. Chris Rock voices Marty the Zebra, using his sharp comedic timing to bring life to the restless zebra whose desire for freedom sets the entire plot into motion. David Schwimmer voices Melman the Giraffe, channeling his familiar neurotic comedic style into the anxious, health-obsessed giraffe of the group. Jada Pinkett Smith voices Gloria the Hippo, providing much of the emotional grounding and warmth that balances out the antics of the other three lead characters. Sacha Baron Cohen voices King Julian, the flamboyant and self-absorbed lemur king, delivering one of the most memorable and widely quoted performances in the entire film through his exaggerated accent and larger-than-life personality. Cedric the Entertainer voices Maurice, King Julian's long-suffering aide-de-camp, while Andy Richter voices Mort, the tiny lemur obsessed with King Julian's feet, whose brief appearances became a fan-favorite element of the film's comedy. The film also features the memorable ensemble of penguins, voiced by Tom McGrath, who also co-directed the film, along with Chris Miller and Christopher Knights, who brought the sharply comedic, militaristic personalities of Skipper, Kowalski, Rico, and Private to life in a way that would eventually earn the penguins their own spin-off franchise. Madagascar was released in theaters on May 27, 2005, arriving during the busy summer movie season of that year, where it competed against a number of other major studio releases while still managing to become one of the highest-grossing animated films of that year. The film's marketing campaign leaned heavily into its fast-paced humor and colorful visual style, with trailers highlighting the chaotic energy of the zoo animals adjusting to life outside captivity, along with quick glimpses of King Julian's eccentric personality and the penguins' scheming antics, both of which became major selling points for audiences going into the theater. The trailers for Madagascar were designed to showcase the film's blend of slapstick comedy, music-driven sequences, and heartfelt friendship themes, giving audiences a clear sense of the tone before the film even hit theaters, and this marketing approach proved successful in drawing large crowds throughout its theatrical run. Following its theatrical success, Madagascar went on to become a cornerstone franchise for DreamWorks Animation, leading to 2 direct sequels, an extended universe of spin-off films centered on the penguins, multiple television series, a stage adaptation, and a lasting cultural presence that continues to be recognized well over a decade after its original release. The film's blend of relatable themes about identity and belonging, wrapped inside colorful animation and memorable character performances, helped it resonate with both children and adult audiences, contributing to its long-term popularity and its status as one of the defining animated films of the 2000s. Madagascar opens inside the Central Park Zoo in New York City, a place that has become the entire universe for its most famous residents. Long before the audience meets any of the human visitors who pass through its gates every day, the film introduces the audience to the daily rhythm of zoo life through the eyes of the animals who call it home. The very first character the audience meets is Marty the Zebra, who is shown practicing his signature move in front of a mirror inside his enclosure, a confident little dance and pose routine that he performs for the crowds who gather to watch him each day. Marty is charming and well liked by the zoo visitors, but underneath his showmanship there is a quiet restlessness beginning to stir inside him, a feeling he has not yet been able to name or fully understand. As he goes through his morning routine, greeting fans, posing for the crowd, and soaking in the applause, there is a subtle sense that something is missing from his life, even though on the surface everything appears perfect. The film then introduces Alex the lion, who is presented as the undisputed star of the entire zoo. Alex struts out onto his rock formation to thunderous applause, roaring for the crowd, striking poses, and basking in the adoration of everyone who has come to see him. Alex loves being the center of attention, and his enclosure is designed like a stage, complete with dramatic lighting effects and a general sense of theater that perfectly suits his larger-than-life personality. He is shown being fed enormous slabs of meat by the zookeepers, a detail that becomes extremely important later in the story, and he happily devours his meals without a single thought about where the meat actually comes from or what it means for a lion to eat meat in the first place. To Alex, food simply appears, delivered on schedule, prepared and ready to eat, with no connection whatsoever to the idea of hunting or survival. This blissful ignorance defines his entire existence at the beginning of the film. Melman the Giraffe is introduced next, shown anxiously visiting with the zoo veterinarian, listing off an exaggerated series of symptoms and ailments that mostly exist only in his own head. Melman is a chronic worrier, someone who has convinced himself that every small sensation in his body is a sign of a serious illness, and this hypochondria becomes one of his defining traits throughout the film. Despite his anxious nature, Melman is deeply loyal to his friends, and much of his nervous energy comes from a genuine fear of losing the safety and predictability of the only life he has ever known. Gloria the Hippo rounds out the main group of friends, introduced as calm, warm, and grounded, someone who serves as the emotional center that holds Alex, Marty, and Melman together whenever their personalities threaten to clash. Gloria enjoys her enclosure's pool, spending her days relaxing in the water while keeping a watchful, affectionate eye on her friends, ready to offer a steadying word whenever one of them needs it. The film shows the friends going about a completely ordinary day, exchanging jokes and gentle teasing, enjoying the comfort and structure that has defined their entire lives inside the zoo. It becomes clear that this routine, however comfortable, has started to feel confining to Marty in particular, even though he has not yet said anything to his friends about it. That night, on the eve of his 10th birthday, Marty lies awake in his enclosure, staring out at the nighttime skyline of New York City, thinking about the strange fact that he has spent every single day of his life behind the same fences, looking out at a world he has never actually been allowed to enter. The film lingers on this quiet, reflective moment, letting the audience understand that for all the applause and comfort in Marty's life, he still does not know who he really is outside the context of being a zoo attraction. Turning 10 years old suddenly feels like a milestone that forces him to confront a deeper question about what he actually wants from the rest of his life. Driven by this swelling curiosity and a growing need to understand what exists beyond the walls of his enclosure, Marty decides that very night to escape from the zoo. He manages to slip past the fencing and makes his way out into the streets of New York City, walking through Central Park under the cover of darkness, taking in the sights, sounds, and smells of a world he has never experienced firsthand. He wanders through the city with wide-eyed wonder, marveling at everything from the towering buildings to the ordinary bustle of nighttime pedestrians, savoring every second of unfamiliar freedom. Eventually, Marty makes his way to Grand Central Station, drawn by a poster advertising a train departure to Connecticut, and specifically to a place mentioned as home to wild horses. Believing this might be the key to understanding where he truly belongs, Marty begins seriously considering the idea of boarding a train and leaving the city altogether, hoping that seeing wild horses might help him make sense of his own zebra identity, since he has never actually met another zebra or any wild relative in his entire life. Meanwhile, back at the zoo, Alex wakes up and quickly realizes that Marty is missing from his enclosure. Panicked at the thought of his best friend being out in the dangerous unknown of New York City alone, Alex wastes no time rallying Melman and Gloria, and the three of them set out into the city together in a frantic search to find Marty and bring him back before the zookeepers or anyone else notices he is gone. This chase through the city becomes one of the most chaotic and comedic sequences early in the film, as the three animals dash through streets, alleyways, and public spaces, causing panic among unsuspecting New Yorkers who are shocked to see a lion, a giraffe, and a hippo running loose through their neighborhood in the middle of the night. Alex, Melman, and Gloria eventually catch up to Marty at Grand Central Station just as he is preparing to board the train to Connecticut, and a chaotic reunion unfolds amid the confusion of departing passengers and startled onlookers. The commotion inside Grand Central Station quickly escalates as police officers and animal control officials arrive on the scene, having been alerted to reports of loose zoo animals running wild through the city. Despite their attempts to explain themselves and calm the situation, the four friends are ultimately captured and subdued by animal control using tranquilizer darts, and the chaotic escape that began with Marty's quiet birthday wish for freedom ends with all four of them being taken into custody. News of the incident spreads quickly, and it does not take long for zoo officials and city authorities to determine that having a lion loose in New York City, even accidentally, represents a public safety concern that cannot be allowed to happen again. Faced with mounting pressure and negative publicity surrounding the incident, the decision is made at the highest levels to relocate the four escaped animals away from New York City entirely, sending them instead to a wildlife preserve in Kenya, where officials believe they can be safely reintroduced to a more natural environment far from crowded urban streets. Before their departure, animal rights activists who have been advocating on behalf of the zoo animals stage a protest outside the zoo, arguing passionately that these animals deserve to live in their natural habitats rather than being kept in captivity for public entertainment. Though the four friends themselves are apprehensive about the idea of leaving the only home they have ever known, they are given no real choice in the matter, and preparations begin to ship them overseas in individual wooden crates aboard a cargo vessel bound for Kenya. As they are loaded onto the ship, the friends try to comfort one another about the uncertainty that lies ahead, with Alex reassuring the group that everything will be fine and that they will stick together no matter what challenges the journey brings. Melman, true to form, spirals into anxious worry about the unknown dangers that might await them, while Gloria attempts to keep everyone calm and Marty quietly reflects on the fact that his original wish for adventure has now spiraled into something far larger and more uncertain than he ever intended. Unbeknownst to the four main characters, the ship carrying their crates is also home to a group of four penguins, Skipper, Kowalski, Rico, and Private, who have their own secret agenda entirely separate from the drama unfolding around Alex, Marty, Melman, and Gloria. These penguins, introduced with a distinctly military bearing and a habit of speaking in clipped tactical language, have been planning an elaborate escape of their own, intending to hijack the vessel and redirect its course toward Antarctica, which they consider to be their true home despite having spent time in captivity at the very same Central Park Zoo. The penguins execute their plan with precision, storming the ship's control room and attempting to seize command of the vessel, resulting in a chaotic struggle that throws the entire ship into disarray. During the resulting commotion, the crates containing Alex, Marty, Melman, and Gloria are knocked loose from their securing straps and washed overboard into the ocean, sending all four friends adrift at sea while the penguins continue their own struggle for control of the ship elsewhere. The crates eventually wash ashore, not on the coast of Kenya as originally planned, but instead on the shores of the island of Madagascar, a location entirely unfamiliar to all four of the friends and worlds away from both the concrete streets of New York and the intended wildlife preserve they had been destined for. One by one, the crates break open along the beach, and the four friends emerge groggy and disoriented, uncertain at first whether they are still dreaming or whether they have truly ended up somewhere completely unknown. As they take in their surroundings, they are struck by the vivid, untouched beauty of the island, filled with dense jungle, wide open beaches, and none of the familiar sights or sounds of New York City anywhere to be found. For a brief moment, there is a sense of wonder and excitement at the strange new world before them, particularly for Marty, who instantly feels a surge of joy at finally standing somewhere that feels genuinely wild and untamed, a sharp contrast to the highly structured environment they left behind. It does not take long, however, for the harsh realities of their situation to set in. Unlike the zoo, there are no zookeepers here to provide regular meals, no scheduled feeding times, and no safety fencing to protect them from the unknown dangers that might be lurking in the surrounding jungle. Melman immediately begins fretting over the lack of any medical facilities should something go wrong, while Gloria tries to keep the group's spirits from collapsing entirely under the weight of their unfamiliar circumstances. Alex, for his part, initially maintains his usual confident bravado, trying to reassure his friends that they will figure things out together, drawing on the leadership instincts that made him the star of the zoo. However, beneath his confident exterior, a quiet unease begins to creep in, though at this early point in the story, Alex has not yet realized just how much this unfamiliar environment is going to change him. The group's arrival on the island quickly draws the attention of a tribe of ring-tailed lemurs, led by their flamboyant, self-proclaimed king, King Julian XIII. King Julian makes his grand entrance with tremendous fanfare, riding out on a makeshift throne carried by his subjects, dressed in an eccentric assortment of adornments, and speaking with an exaggerated accent that immediately marks him as one of the most distinctive personalities in the entire film. Accompanying him is his loyal but perpetually exasperated aide, Maurice, who serves as both his closest advisor and the frequent target of his more absurd demands, along with a tiny, wide-eyed lemur named Mort, who is inexplicably and hilariously obsessed with touching Alex's feet at every possible opportunity, a running gag that continues throughout the rest of the film. King Julian initially approaches the four newcomers with suspicion, but this quickly turns into calculated enthusiasm once he realizes that the arrival of a lion in particular might solve a problem that has been plaguing his lemur kingdom for a very long time. King Julian explains, with a great deal of theatrical flair, that the island of Madagascar is home to a dangerous population of predatory creatures known as Fasa, who periodically raid the lemur territory in search of prey, forcing King Julian and his subjects to live in constant fear of being hunted. Seeing an opportunity in Alex's imposing size and status as a lion, King Julian proposes that the New York animals stay on as protectors, believing that Alex's mere presence might be enough to intimidate the Fasa into leaving the lemurs alone. In exchange, King Julian offers the group a place within the lemur community, along with access to food and shelter, an offer that Alex and his friends, having no better alternative, ultimately decide to accept, even though none of them are entirely certain what they have actually signed up for. What follows is an elaborate welcoming celebration organized by King Julian and his lemur subjects, filled with wild music, energetic dancing, and colorful island rituals meant to formally welcome the newcomers into the fold, giving the audience one of the film's most memorable and joyous sequences early in the island portion of the story. As the days pass, the four friends begin attempting to adjust to their strange new life on the island, each in their own way. Marty finally begins to experience the sense of freedom and belonging he had been yearning for back in New York, spending his days running wild across open plains, playing with the local wildlife, and reveling in the sheer scale and openness of a world that feels utterly unlike anything he ever knew inside his enclosure. For Marty, this period of adjustment feels less like survival and more like the fulfillment of a long-held dream, and he throws himself into exploring every inch of the island with genuine enthusiasm. Melman, despite his constant nervous energy, slowly begins to find his footing as well, using his height to keep watch for potential danger, even as he continues to worry obsessively about parasites, unfamiliar plants, and every possible way the island might pose a threat to his health. Gloria, ever the calming presence, works to keep the group functioning as a unit, encouraging everyone to look out for one another and maintain the friendship that has carried them through every challenge so far, even as their circumstances grow increasingly unfamiliar and difficult. Alex, however, finds himself facing a challenge unlike anything the others are experiencing. Without the regular meat deliveries he received every single day at the zoo, Alex begins to grow hungrier and hungrier as the days pass, and this hunger starts to awaken something deep within him that he has never had to confront before, an instinctual predatory drive that had remained completely dormant during his entire life in captivity. At first, Alex tries to ignore the growing hunger, distracting himself with his usual charm and confidence, attempting to maintain the same easygoing persona that made him such a beloved star back at the zoo. But as the hunger intensifies, Alex begins to notice troubling changes in himself, moments where his instincts flare up unexpectedly, drawing his attention toward Marty and the other zebras and antelope-like creatures on the island in ways that unsettle him deeply. Alex begins to have unsettling dreams filled with imagery of steaks and juicy meat, dreams that grow increasingly vivid and disturbing as his hunger continues to build, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth that, at his core, he is a predator, no matter how far removed he has been from that reality throughout his entire pampered life in New York. This internal struggle comes to a head during a pivotal and emotionally intense sequence in which Alex, driven by hunger and his resurging predatory instincts, ends up in a dangerously charged confrontation with Marty. In a moment that plays out with genuine tension rather than the film's usual comedic tone, Alex's instincts nearly overpower him, and for a brief but terrifying moment, it seems as though he might actually harm his closest friend, the very zebra whose birthday wish set this entire adventure into motion in the first place. The other animals on the island, having witnessed this shift in Alex's behavior, grow increasingly wary and fearful of him, and Marty in particular is left deeply shaken and hurt by the realization that his best friend's very nature might pose a genuine threat to his life. This rift threatens to permanently fracture the friendship between Alex and Marty, and by extension the bond holding the entire group together, introducing real emotional stakes into what has, up to this point, largely been a fast-paced comedic adventure. Isolated from his friends and grappling with shame over his own uncontrollable instincts, Alex withdraws from the group, struggling internally with the fear that he might never be able to control the primal urges now surging inside him. Meanwhile, the rest of the group must decide how to move forward, torn between their loyalty to Alex and their legitimate fear for their own safety, particularly Marty's safety, given how close things came to disaster. During this period of separation, the film explores themes of identity and self-acceptance, questioning whether Alex's wild instincts define who he truly is, or whether the loving, loyal friend his companions have always known can still coexist with the predator that nature designed him to be. This tension forms the emotional backbone of the film's back half, elevating what might otherwise be a straightforward fish-out-of-water comedy into a story with genuine heart and stakes. While this personal drama unfolds among the main group, King Julian and his lemur subjects continue dealing with their own ongoing troubles, particularly their persistent fear of the fossa, who continue to pose a threat to the safety of the lemur kingdom throughout the film. King Julian's method of dealing with this fear largely involves elaborate rituals, celebratory feasts, and a running obsession with the idea of holding a barbecue, a recurring joke that pays off in a variety of increasingly absurd ways as the story progresses. These lighter, comedic sequences involving King Julian, Maurice, and Mort help balance out the heavier emotional material surrounding Alex's internal struggle, ensuring that the film maintains its energetic, family-friendly tone even as it ventures into more serious territory involving predator instincts and the fear of losing a friendship. Meanwhile, Back aboard the damaged cargo ship, the four penguins, Skipper, Kowalski, Rico, and Private, have spent this entire portion of the story quietly working in the background to repair the vessel following their earlier hijacking attempt, determined to get the ship operational again so they can complete their journey toward Antarctica. Presented with their trademark deadpan humor and military precision, the Penguins subplot runs parallel to the main story throughout the film, offering brief comedic check-ins that remind the audience of their ongoing efforts even as the primary focus remains on Alex, Marty, Melman, and Gloria's adventures on the island. Their persistence and resourcefulness throughout this repair process foreshadow the crucial role they will eventually play in helping the four friends find their way back home before the story reaches its conclusion. As tensions between Alex and Marty continue to simmer, the Fossa make their move against the Lemur Kingdom, launching a coordinated attack that puts King Julian, Maurice, Mort, and the rest of the Lemur tribe in genuine danger. This crisis forces the entire group, including Alex, Marty, Melman, and Gloria, to set aside their personal conflicts and come together in order to protect their new lemur friends from the approaching threat. During this climactic confrontation, Alex is finally forced to fully embrace his predatory instincts, not as something to be feared or suppressed, but as a genuine strength that can be used to protect the people he cares about. Rather than his wild side representing a threat to his friends, this moment reframes Alex's true nature as something that, when properly understood and controlled, can actually serve as a source of protection and courage for the group as a whole. Through his actions during this confrontation with the Fossa, Alex begins to reconcile the two seemingly opposing sides of his identity, the beloved, showboating zoo star that his friends have always known and cherished, and the powerful wild predator that lies within him as a fundamental part of his nature as a lion. Marty, witnessing Alex's bravery and his willingness to protect the lemur community despite his own internal struggles, begins to understand that his friend's wild instincts do not have to define him as dangerous or untrustworthy, but rather represent an essential part of who Alex has always been beneath the surface. Something that can coexist with the deep loyalty and friendship Alex has always shown toward Marty and the rest of the group. This reconciliation marks a turning point in the story, allowing Alex and Marty to begin repairing their fractured friendship as the immediate danger from the Fossa passes and the Lemur Kingdom returns to relative safety. In the aftermath of the confrontation with the Fossa, the four friends find themselves reflecting on everything they have experienced since their unexpected arrival on the island, and how much their understanding of themselves and one another has changed as a result. Marty, who once longed desperately for the kind of freedom and adventure the island has provided, begins to reconsider what he truly wants for his future, weighing his newfound appreciation for the wild against his deep bond with his friends and the life they shared together back at the zoo. Melman, having survived numerous imagined and occasionally very real health scares throughout their time on the island, comes to realize that his anxious nature, while sometimes exaggerated, has also helped keep the group cautious and aware of genuine dangers throughout their journey. Gloria continues to serve as the group's emotional glue, celebrating the fact that despite everything they have been through, their friendship has ultimately proven strong enough to weather even the most serious challenges, including Alex's terrifying brush with his own predatory instincts. As the story moves toward its resolution, the Penguins finally succeed in fully repairing the cargo ship they hijacked earlier in the film, restoring it to working condition and preparing it for departure once again. With the ship now operational, an opportunity presents itself for Alex, Marty, Melman, and Gloria to potentially find their way back home to New York City, a possibility that raises complicated feelings among the group given everything they have experienced and how much their lives on the island, however unexpected, have come to mean to them. The film balances this bittersweet decision with a sense of excitement about the possibility of returning home, weaving together the comedic energy of the Penguins' triumphant repair of the ship with the more heartfelt emotional payoff of the main character's journey towards self-acceptance and renewed friendship. The film ultimately closes with a sense of resolution and celebration, as the four friends, now more secure in their understanding of themselves and one another, prepared to embark on the next chapter of their unlikely adventure, setting up the possibility of further stories to come while still delivering a satisfying conclusion to the specific journey that began with Marty's simple birthday wish for freedom. The King Julian and Lemur storyline resolves with the island community safer and more secure than it was at the beginning of the film, while the penguins stand ready to take charge of the ship once again, their competence and determination throughout the film finally paying off in spectacular fashion. Madagascar closes on a note that captures the very essence of its story, blending fast-paced comedy, memorable musical energy, and a genuinely heartfelt message about identity, friendship, and the courage it takes to accept every part of who you truly are, even the parts that once felt frightening or unfamiliar. The voice cast behind Madagascar brought together an unusual mix of stand-up comedians, sitcom stars, British satirists, and DreamWorks insiders, and each of them arrived at this animated film after a long and distinctive journey through the entertainment industry. Understanding who these performers are and how they built their careers adds another layer of appreciation to the film, since so much of Madagascar's comedic energy comes directly from the real-life personalities and comedic instincts these actors brought into the recording booth. Ben Stiller, who voices Alex the Lion, was born Benjamin Edward Mira Stiller on November 30, 1965, in New York City. He grew up as the son of two celebrated comedians, Jerry Stiller and Ann Mira, who were themselves a well-known comedy duo throughout the 1960s and beyond. Growing up surrounded by the entertainment industry gave Stiller an early and constant exposure to comedy, performance, and the rhythms of show business, and even as a child he was already drawn toward creating his own material, picking up a Super 8 camera around the age of 10 and shooting simple short films with his sister Amy, often built around stories of a shy, awkward character getting revenge on more popular figures around him. This early fascination with filmmaking would end up shaping much of his later career, since Stiller did not simply want to perform in front of the camera but also wanted to control what happened behind it. He attended the University of California, Los Angeles as a film student, but he dropped out after only a matter of months, feeling that he needed to get out into the real world of New York theater and television rather than continue with formal film school training. Back in New York, he threw himself into the local theater scene, appearing in a 1986 Broadway production, and it was around this time that his sharp comedic sensibility and his talent for impressions began attracting attention from television producers. He briefly joined Saturday Night Live as a writer and performer in 1989, though his time there was short-lived, and he soon moved into a role developing video projects for MTV, an experience that eventually led to the creation of his own sketch series, The Ben Stiller Show, which aired on Fox in the early 1990s. Although the show only lasted a short time, it left a lasting mark on comedy history, since it helped launch the careers of several other major comedic voices who worked alongside him, and it also gave Stiller his first real platform to showcase his particular brand of anxious, high-energy humor. Stiller's next major move was into feature film directing, making his directorial debut with the romantic drama Reality Bites in 1994, followed by The Cable Guy in 1996. A Jim Carrey-led comedy that received mixed reactions upon release but has since grown into something of a cult favorite. Stiller's acting career reached new heights in the late 1990s and throughout the 2000s, with roles in a long stretch of hit comedies that included There's Something About Mary, Meet the Parents, Zoolander, Dodgeball, and Along Came Polly, each of which reinforced his reputation as one of the most successful and bankable comedic leading men in Hollywood. By the time Madagascar arrived in 2005, Stiller had already established himself as a performer known for playing high-strung, neurotic, or overconfident characters, a skill set that translated perfectly into the role of Alex, the pampered, spotlight-loving zoo lion whose comfortable identity is suddenly thrown into chaos. In the years following Madagascar, Stiller continued expanding his career with the Night at the Museum franchise Tropic Thunder, which he also wrote and directed, and later dramatic and directorial work including the acclaimed television series Severance, showing a continued willingness throughout his career to move between broad comedy and more serious, layered storytelling. Chris Rock, who lends his voice to Marty the Zebra, was born Christopher Julius Rock III on February 7, 1965, in Andrews, South Carolina, though his family soon relocated to Brooklyn, New York, where he was raised in the working class, often difficult environment of the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood. As a child, Rock was bused to predominantly white schools in Brooklyn as part of an integration program, an experience that exposed him to significant racism and bullying throughout his early education. This experience proved deeply formative, and Rock has spoken openly over the years about how those difficult school years shaped both his worldview and the sharp, socially conscious edge that would later define his stand-up comedy. He eventually dropped out of high school, later earning his general educational development diploma, and took on a series of odd jobs, including work at fast food restaurants and as a hospital orderly, all while beginning to test out material at open mic nights around New York City. Rock's stand-up career formally began in 1984, when at just 19 years old he started performing in New York comedy clubs, most notably at the legendary venue Catch a Rising Star, a spot that had already helped launch numerous major comedic careers. It was there that Eddie Murphy, already a major star at the time, noticed Rock's talent and took him under his wing, eventually giving him his first film role in Beverly Hills Cop 2 in 1987. This mentorship proved to be a turning point, opening doors that led to further film roles and eventually a spot on Saturday Night Live in 1990, where Rock became part of a group of castmates who would later be nicknamed the Bad Boys of SNL, alongside comedians like Chris Farley, David Spade, Rob Schneider, and Adam Sandler. Despite this exposure, Rock often felt underutilized during his time on the show and left in 1993, briefly joining the competing sketch series In Living Color before that show was cancelled shortly afterward. Rather than seeing this as a setback, Rock used the following years to refocus entirely on his stand-up career, releasing his first comedy album in 1991 and following it with a series of HBO specials that would ultimately define his legacy as one of the sharpest and most fearless comedians of his generation. His 1996 special Bring the Pain proved to be a major breakthrough, earning him 2 Emmy Awards and establishing him as a dominant voice in comedy, tackling subjects like race, politics, and society with a directness that few other comedians of the era were willing to match. Building on this momentum, Rock went on to host his own HBO series, The Chris Rock Show, and continued building an impressive film career that included dramatic work in New Jack City, as well as broader comedic roles in films like Down to Earth and Head of State, which he also directed and co-wrote. By the time Madagascar was released in 2005, Rock had firmly established himself as both a respected stand-up performer and a comedic film presence, making him a natural fit for the fast-talking, restless Marty the Zebra, whose search for identity and freedom echoes some of the deeper themes Rock has often explored in his own comedy about self-discovery and searching for one's place in the world. David Schwimmer, who voices the anxious and lovable Melman the Giraffe, was born David Lawrence Schwimmer on November 2, 1966, in Queens, New York, to parents Arthur Schwimmer and Arlene Coleman, both of whom worked as attorneys. His family eventually relocated to Los Angeles, where Schwimmer attended Beverly Hills High School, and it was during this period that a teacher recognized his natural talent for performance and encouraged him to attend a summer acting program at Northwestern University. That experience proved pivotal, solidifying Schwimmer's desire to pursue acting seriously, and he went on to enroll at Northwestern, earning a bachelor's degree in speech and theater in 1988. While still at Northwestern, Schwimmer co-founded the Looking Glass Theater Company in Chicago along with several fellow graduates, an ensemble-driven company built around innovative and physically dynamic theatrical storytelling, and this company would remain an important part of his creative life for decades to come, even as his screen career grew. After college, Schwimmer worked to build a career in both Chicago and Los Angeles, taking small television roles throughout the early 1990s on shows like LA Law, The Wonder Years, and NYPD Blue, while continuing to struggle for consistent, larger opportunities. His first substantial recurring role came in the short-lived 1994 series Monty, opposite Henry Winkler, but it was his casting as Ross Geller in the sitcom Friends later that same year that would completely transform his career and turn him into one of the most recognizable faces on television. Friends, which ran from 1994 to 2004, became a defining cultural phenomenon of its era, and Schwimmer's portrayal of the awkward, endlessly earnest paleontologist earned him a Screen Actors Guild Award along with an Emmy nomination, cementing his status as one of the show's most beloved central figures. During his years on Friends, Schwimmer also began developing his skills as a director, eventually directing 10 episodes of the series himself, an experience that helped fuel his growing interest in filmmaking beyond acting. Following the conclusion of Friends, Schwimmer took on a range of projects that showed his willingness to move away from the comedic persona that made him famous, including the war drama miniseries Band of Brothers, in which he played a demanding and complicated army officer, a role that demonstrated real dramatic range. He also continued to work as a director, making his feature directorial debut with Run Fat Boy Run in 2007, followed by the drama Trust in 2010. Schwimmer's voice work as Melman in the Madagascar franchise became one of his most enduring and beloved roles outside of Friends, allowing him to channel the same nervous, endearing energy that made Ross Geller such a memorable character into an entirely different medium. In the years following Madagascar, Schwimmer continued to build a diverse career, taking on the role of attorney Robert Kardashian in the acclaimed miniseries American Crime Story, The People v. O.J. Simpson, a performance that earned him further award recognition and proved his ability to inhabit real, complicated historical figures with nuance and sensitivity. Jada Pinkett Smith, who voices Gloria the Hippo, was born Jada Corin Pinkett on September 18, 1971, in Baltimore, Maryland. Her parents divorced when she was very young, and she was primarily raised by her mother and grandmother, both of whom played significant roles in shaping her early life and her eventual path into the arts. Pinkett Smith showed an early interest in performance, studying dance and choreography at the Baltimore School for the Arts, where she was classmates with the future rapper and actor Tupac Shakur, with whom she would go on to form a close and lasting friendship that lasted until his death in 1996. After graduating, she briefly attended the North Carolina School of the Arts as a drama major before deciding to leave school entirely and relocate to Los Angeles in pursuit of an acting career, moving in with a family friend who helped introduce her to people working in the entertainment industry. Her earliest television work included small guest appearances on shows like Doogie Howser, MD and 21 Jump Street, but her first major recurring role came in 1991, when she was cast in the popular sitcom A Different World, a spin-off of The Cosby Show that focused on students at a fictional historically black college. This role helped introduce her to a wider audience and served as her true entry point into a sustained acting career. Pinkett Smith made her feature film debut in 1993 with Menace to Society, a gritty and critically respected crime drama that, despite controversy over its violent content, helped establish her as a serious dramatic actress early in her career. She continued building her filmography throughout the 1990s with roles in films such as The Inkwell, Jason's Lyric, A Low-Down Dirty Shame, and the horror anthology film Demon Knight, but it was her role opposite Eddie Murphy in the 1996 comedy The Nutty Professor that brought her significantly wider recognition. Around this same period, Pinkett Smith crossed paths with actor Will Smith, whom she had actually first met years earlier during an audition for The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, though she did not land that particular role. The two eventually began a relationship and married on December 31, 1997, going on to have 2 children together, Jaden and Willow, both of whom would themselves go on to pursue careers in entertainment. Throughout the early 2000s, Pinkett Smith continued to build a diverse resume, appearing in major studio productions like The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions, as well as smaller character-driven films, while also exploring her interest in music by forming and fronting the heavy metal band Wicked Wisdom, releasing a self-titled album several years after the group's formation. Her role as Gloria in Madagascar introduced her to an entirely new generation of viewers through animated family entertainment, allowing her warm, grounded voice work to become closely associated with one of the film's most emotionally steady characters. In the years since, Pinkett Smith has continued to diversify her career even further, moving into television production and hosting with the widely discussed talk show Red Table Talk, for which she earned a Daytime Emmy Award, in addition to being recognized by Time magazine as one of the most influential people in the world. Sacha Baron Cohen, the performer behind the wildly theatrical King Julian, was born Sacha Noam Baron Cohen on October 13, 1971, in London, England, into a Jewish family, with a father who ran a series of clothing stores and a mother who worked as a fitness instructor. From a young age, Baron Cohen displayed a strong interest in performance, forming a breakdancing troupe as a teenager and taking part in amateur theatrical productions organized through a Jewish youth group. He pursued a more academic path during his university years, studying history at Christ's College, Cambridge, where he also became deeply involved with the Cambridge University Amateur Dramatic Club, further developing his comedic and performance instincts even while working toward a serious academic degree. After graduating, rather than pursuing further postgraduate study, which he reportedly considered at one point, Baron Cohen moved into television, initially working on various youth-oriented programming projects in the mid-1990s. It was during this period that he began developing the earliest versions of characters that would eventually define his career, including a fictional Eastern European or Central Asian television reporter persona that would later evolve into the character of Borat. His breakthrough character, however, was Ali G, a satirical portrayal of a delusional, wannabe hip-hop journalist from suburban England, who Baron Cohen used to conduct absurd and revealing interviews with real politicians, celebrities, and public figures who did not realize they were being interviewed by a fictional character. Ali G first appeared on the British program The 11 O'Clock Show in the late 1990s, quickly becoming a cult sensation, and this success led to Baron Cohen's own spin-off series, The Ali G Show, which debuted in Britain in 2000 before eventually being exported to American audiences via HBO in 2003. During this same era, Baron Cohen also starred in the feature film Ali G In-House, further expanding the character's reach on the big screen. Around this time, Baron Cohen was cast as the voice of King Julian in Madagascar, marking one of his first major American feature film roles and giving him the opportunity to bring the same kind of committed, exaggerated character work that made Ali G, Borat, and later Bruno so distinctive into the world of family animation. The timing of Madagascar's release placed it just before Baron Cohen's career reached its most explosive point, as later that same year and into the following year, he began work on the mockumentary film Borat, Cultural Learnings of America for Make-Benefit Glorious Nation of Kazakhstan, released in 2006, which became a massive global hit, earning Baron Cohen a Golden Globe Award for Best Actor as well as an Academy Award nomination for its screenplay. Following the success of Borat, Baron Cohen continued creating provocative, character-driven comedic films throughout his career, including Bruno and the Dictator, while also branching into more traditional dramatic and comedic acting roles in films such as Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street, Hugo, Les Miserables, and later, the acclaimed drama The Trial of the Chicago 7, for which he received both Academy Award and Golden Globe nominations for his supporting performance. Cedric the Entertainer, who voices King Julian's exasperated but loyal aide-de-camp Maurice, was born Cedric Antonio Kiles on April 24, 1964, in Jefferson City, Missouri, to a mother named Rosetta, who worked as a schoolteacher, and a father named Kittrell, who was employed by a railroad company. He spent part of his early childhood in Caruthersville, Missouri, before his family eventually relocated to Berkeley, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis, where he attended high school and quickly earned a reputation among his classmates for his natural comedic timing, being voted both most popular and most humorous during his time there. After completing his education, which included time at Southeast Missouri State University, Kyles began pursuing stand-up comedy seriously, and in 1990 he won the Miller Lite Comedy Search Competition, an early milestone that helped validate his decision to pursue comedy as a full-time career. He continued building his profile throughout the early 1990s, making his first television appearance in 1992 on the variety program at Showtime at the Apollo, followed by a stint hosting BT's Comic View during the 1993 to 1994 season, and later hosting an installment of HBO's influential Def Comedy Jam. His television career gained further momentum with a supporting role on The Steve Harvey Show, where he played Cedric Jackie Robinson, a character that helped introduce him to an even wider audience throughout the second half of the 1990s. It was during this same period that Cedric joined forces with fellow comedians Steve Harvey, D.L. Hughley, and Bernie Mac for what would become one of the most successful stand-up comedy tours in history, the Kings of Comedy, which toured extensively between 1997 and 1999, grossing tens of millions of dollars and eventually being turned into a concert film directed by Spike Lee. The original Kings of Comedy, released in 2000. This tour, and its accompanying film cemented Cedric's status as one of the most beloved comedic performers of his generation, and served as a major launching pad for his subsequent acting career in film and television. Building on this success, he went on to star in the Barbershop film franchise, along with numerous other film and television projects, and in 2002 he also founded his own production company, further establishing himself as a multifaceted force within the entertainment industry, not just as a performer but as a creative businessperson as well. By the time Madagascar arrived in 2005, Cedric was already a well-established comedic voice, and his casting as Maurice allowed him to bring his signature warm, exasperated comedic delivery to a character whose entire role revolves around trying to manage the far more chaotic personality of King Julian. Andy Richter, who provides the voice of the tiny, endearingly obsessive Lemur Mort, was born Paul Andrew Richter on October 28, 1966, in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He would go on to study at Columbia College in Chicago, immersing himself in the city's rich comedy and improvisational theater scene, a background that would prove instrumental in shaping his eventual comedic style and his ability to think quickly on his feet. Richter's big break came through a connection with Saturday Night Live writer Robert Smigel, whom he met through mutual friends in the comedy world, and this relationship eventually led to Richter being hired as a writer for a brand new late-night program being developed for NBC in the early 1990s, one that would be hosted by a then largely unknown writer and performer named Conan O'Brien. During rehearsals and early testing for the show, it became clear that Richter and O'Brien had a natural, easy comedic chemistry together, and rather than remaining solely behind the scenes as a writer, Richter was brought on as O'Brien's on-air sidekick, a role that would come to define much of his early career. Late Night with Conan O'Brien debuted in 1993, and Richter remained by O'Brien's side as his sidekick and comedic foil for 7 years, helping to build the show's distinctive, often surreal comedic sensibility before departing in 2000 to pursue other acting opportunities. A decision he later described as driven by a desire to test how far he could stretch his good fortune rather than settling into a comfortable routine. Following his departure from Late Night, Richter starred in his own television projects, including the short-lived but well-regarded Fox sitcom Andy Richter Controls the Universe, and he continued building a steady career as a character actor in film, appearing in projects such as Elf, Talladega Nights, and Blades of Glory. His casting as the voice of Mort in Madagascar came during this period of his career, giving him the chance to bring his distinctively warm, slightly off-kilter comedic voice to one of the film's smallest but most memorable characters. In 2009, Richter returned to work alongside Conan O'Brien once again, taking on the role of announcer when O'Brien briefly took over hosting duties on The Tonight Show, and when O'Brien later moved to a new program on TBS called Conan, Richter joined him there as well, continuing their long-standing creative partnership all the way through the show's conclusion in 2021. Tom McGrath, who not only co-directed Madagascar alongside Eric Darnell but also voiced the sharply commanding penguin leader Skipper, was born Thomas McGrath on August 7, 1964, and was raised in Linwood, Washington. Before establishing himself as a director, McGrath built a long career as an animator and storyboard artist, studying industrial design at the University of Washington before continuing his animation education through the character animation program at CalArts, one of the most respected training grounds for animators in the industry. His early professional animation work included contributions to Ralph Bakshi's unconventional feature Cool World, as well as animation work on the basketball comedy Space Jam, and storyboard and directing work on the influential and irreverent animated series The Ren and Stimpy Show, an experience that helped sharpen his sense of visual comedy and exaggerated character timing. McGrath eventually joined DreamWorks Animation, where he continued to build his career as a storyboard artist and director across a variety of projects before eventually stepping into his most significant role yet as co-director, co-writer, and co-creator of Madagascar, a project that also gave him the opportunity to voice the character of Skipper, a role he took on somewhat by accident after initially agreeing to record temporary placeholder dialogue for the Penguins before the studio settled on a permanent voice actor. His performance ended up resonating so strongly with the creative team that his voice was ultimately kept in the finished film, and he went on to reprise the role of Skipper across every subsequent Madagascar sequel, as well as the spin-off television series The Penguins of Madagascar, and the feature film built around the penguin characters. Beyond his ongoing work within the Madagascar franchise, McGrath went on to direct additional major animated features for DreamWorks, including Megamind in 2010 and The Boss Baby in 2017, the latter of which earned both Academy Award and Golden Globe nominations, further cementing his reputation as one of the studio's most versatile and successful directors. Chris Miller, who voices the meticulous and quietly eccentric penguin Kowalski, was born Christopher Matthew Miller on January 20, 1968, in Washington, D.C. Like several of his DreamWorks collaborators, Miller's animation career began outside the studio system, working as an animator on Ralph Bakshi's unconventional film Cool World in the early 1990s, an experience that connected him with other future DreamWorks talents who would go on to shape the studio's earliest projects. Miller studied animation at CalArts before eventually joining DreamWorks Animation, where he began his career as a storyboard artist, contributing to early studio productions including Ants and the original Shrek film. His storytelling instincts and comedic sensibility quickly stood out within the studio, and he was promoted to head of story for Shrek 2, a significant creative leadership role that showcased his growing influence over the franchise's tone and humor. During this same period, Miller also became closely associated with voice work, providing voices for a number of DreamWorks characters, including his now well-known portrayal of the endlessly analytical and slightly unstable penguin Kowalski in the Madagascar franchise. Building on the trust he had earned through his story department leadership, Miller was eventually given the opportunity to direct, taking the helm of Shrek III in 2007, a major responsibility that placed him at the center of one of the studio's most valuable franchises. He continued his directing career with Puss in Boots in 2011, a spin-off prequel built around the beloved Shrek character voiced by Antonio Banderas, and this film earned Miller his first Academy Award nomination for Best Animated Feature, a significant recognition of his growth from storyboard artist to accomplished director over the course of his career at DreamWorks. Christopher Knights, who rounds out the Penguin Quartet as the voice of the small, sweet-natured private, has spent much of his career working within DreamWorks Animation itself as a story artist, contributing his talents to the studio's creative process from behind the scenes in addition to his voice work on the Madagascar franchise. Like several of his fellow penguin voice actors, Knights represents the close-knit, collaborative nature of DreamWorks' internal culture during this era of the studio's history, where story artists and animators were frequently given the opportunity to lend their voices to characters they had helped shape creatively long before any external casting search began. His portrayal of Private, the youngest and most soft-hearted member of the Penguin Squad, added a gentle, endearing counterbalance to the sharper, more militaristic personalities of Skipper, Kowalski, and Rico, and he has continued to voice the character consistently across the Madagascar franchise's sequels and spin-off projects in the years since the original film's release. Together, this ensemble of comedians, actors, and animation industry veterans helped shape Madagascar into far more than a simple children's film, infusing every character with a distinct comedic personality shaped by real careers built on stand-up stages, sitcom sets, satirical television, and animation studio floors. Their combined experience gave the film a texture and comedic rhythm that helped it stand out among other animated releases of its era, and it is a large part of why these characters and their voices remain so fondly remembered by audiences even many years after the film's original release. Madagascar was produced on a reported budget of roughly $75 million, a substantial but by no means excessive figure by the standards of major studio animated filmmaking in the mid-2000s. That budget had to cover an enormous range of costs, from the salaries of the celebrity voice cast and the small army of story artists, animators, riggers, and technical directors who spent years bringing the film to life, to the rendering power required to generate every frame of the finished movie, the original musical score, and the marketing push needed to introduce a brand new animated franchise to audiences who had never heard of these characters before. When the film was finally released in May of 2005, it went on to earn an extraordinary return on that investment, eventually grossing somewhere in the neighborhood of $556 to $558 million worldwide. A number that made it the sixth highest grossing film of that entire year and instantly justified DreamWorks Animation's decision to build an entire multimedia franchise around these characters. Considering that the film earned back well over 7 times its original production budget, Madagascar stands as one of the more efficient financial success stories in the DreamWorks catalog, especially when compared to some of the studio's more expensive later productions, which required significantly larger budgets to achieve comparable box office results. The road to that box office success, however, began years earlier, in a much less glamorous phase of development that involved countless script rewrites, character redesigns, and creative pivots before the film ever took its final shape. According to co-director Tom McGrath, the entire concept for Madagascar actually began as nothing more than a single-sentence pitch, an incredibly modest starting point for what would eventually become a global franchise spanning multiple sequels, television series, and stage productions. From that single sentence, it took roughly 2 full years of development before the story, the characters, and the tone of the film were refined into anything resembling the finished product audiences eventually saw in theaters. During that lengthy development period, the film went through a number of significant transformations that longtime fans might be surprised to learn about today. In one of the earliest versions of the story, the plot actually centered around a group of animal rights activists who take it upon themselves to liberate the zoo animals from their enclosures, a much more socially pointed premise than the accidental, chaos-driven escape that ultimately made it into the final film. The 4 lead characters also looked quite different on paper during these early stages, with the original lineup consisting of a lion, a zebra, a hippo, and an okapi rather than a giraffe. The okapi, a real but relatively obscure African mammal related to the giraffe, was eventually swapped out in favor of Melman precisely because giraffes are so much more instantly recognizable to general audiences, a practical storytelling decision that ended up giving the world one of the film's most memorable and neurotic characters. Perhaps even more surprising than the animal swap is the origin story behind the penguins, who would go on to become arguably the single most popular element of the entire Madagascar franchise, eventually spinning off into their own television series and feature film. The penguins did not actually originate within the Madagascar development process at all. Instead, they came from a completely separate project that director Eric Darnell had been developing at the time called Rockumentary, envisioned as a mockumentary-style film about a fictional rock band clearly inspired by groups like the Beatles. When that particular project was ultimately shelved, Darnell moved over to work on Madagascar, and rather than letting his rock band concept go to waste entirely, he found a clever way to fold elements of it into the new film, transforming what had originally been conceived as a quartet of musicians into a squad of militaristic, deadpan penguin commandos instead. This behind-the-scenes pivot explains why the penguins have such a distinct group dynamic and tightly bonded team chemistry compared to the other animals in the film, since the character architecture underneath them was originally built around the idea of bandmates rather than soldiers, and that underlying sense of a tightly knit unit carried over beautifully into their new incarnation as a small, hyper-competent, wildly overconfident tactical team. Casting the film also involved a surprising amount of behind-the-scenes maneuvering before the final lineup of actors was locked into place. Before Jada Pinkett Smith was cast as the voice of Gloria the Hippo, the filmmakers reportedly considered several major pop music stars for the role, including Madonna, Jennifer Lopez, and Gwen Stefani, any of whom would have brought a completely different energy to the character than the warmth and grounded confidence Pinkett Smith ultimately delivered. It is fascinating to imagine how differently Gloria's personality might have come across if one of those pop stars had ultimately been cast instead, since Pinkett Smith's performance leans heavily into a nurturing, level-headed energy that became such an important emotional anchor for the rest of the group throughout the film. One of the most widely repeated and beloved behind-the-scenes stories from the entire production involves Sacha Baron Cohen's audition for the role of King Julian, a story that has become something of legend among animation fans over the years. According to accounts from the production, King Julian was originally intended to be an extremely minor character in the story, reportedly written with only a couple of lines of dialogue in early drafts of the script. When Sacha Baron Cohen came in to audition for the role, however, he did something that completely upended the filmmakers' plans. Rather than simply reading the handful of lines he had been given, Cohen launched into a fully improvised performance, adopting an exaggerated accent and delivering roughly 8 full minutes of completely improvised dialogue in character, inventing quirks, verbal tics, and a larger-than-life personality on the spot that had never existed on the page before that moment. The filmmakers in the room were reportedly so taken by how funny and distinctive his performance was that they made the decision, right then and there, to go back and substantially rewrite the script in order to expand King Julian's role dramatically, transforming him from a background character into one of the most memorable and central figures in the entire film. This kind of dramatic, on-the-spot expansion of a role based purely on the strength of an actor's improvisation is relatively rare in major studio animated filmmaking, where scripts and character arcs are typically locked in place well before voice actors ever step into the recording booth, which makes this particular story such a beloved piece of Madagascar production lore. Cohen's improvisational instincts did not stop with that initial audition either, and they continued to shape the film throughout the actual production process. During one of his later recording sessions, while recording dialogue for a specific scene, Cohen spontaneously improvised the line about a gecko being on a particular object, seemingly making the addition up entirely in the moment as a spontaneous bit of humor. The filmmakers found the improvised line and the small comedic bit built around it so funny that they made the decision to go through the extra time, effort, and expense of actually creating a fully rendered computer-generated gecko character specifically to appear in that shot, purely because Cohen's off-the-cuff joke had earned its place in the finished film. This kind of production-level commitment to preserving a spontaneous piece of improvised comedy speaks to just how much creative freedom the voice cast was given throughout the recording process, and it highlights how much of Madagascar's distinctive comedic personality emerged organically during actual recording sessions rather than being locked into a finished script from the very beginning of production. Interestingly, the origin of King Julian's now iconic voice and accent also has its own colorful backstory that stretches beyond the Madagascar production itself. In later interviews, including one memorable appearance on Jimmy Kimmel's talk show, Sacha Baron Cohen revealed that the inspiration for King Julian's distinctive voice actually came from a real person he had worked with during the production of one of his other well-known comedic projects. According to Cohen, while filming material connected to his Borat persona, his production team had a Sri Lankan attorney on standby to help navigate various legal complications that arose during that famously chaotic and often legally precarious shoot. Cohen reportedly became so fond of this attorney's particular speaking voice and cadence that he ended up drawing directly from it when developing the voice of King Julian, essentially immortalizing a real legal advisor's vocal mannerisms inside one of the most recognizable animated characters of the 2000s. A fact that even King Julian's most devoted fans might never have guessed simply from watching the finished film. The voice recording process for Madagascar as a whole followed a workflow that differs quite significantly from how a traditional live-action film gets made, and understanding that process helps explain some of the more unusual and often quite funny moments that emerge during production. Unlike a live-action film, where actors typically perform scenes together in the same physical space, voice actors on animated productions like Madagascar frequently record their dialogue separately from one another, often at completely different times and sometimes even in entirely different cities, with each actor stepping into a small recording booth alone to perform their lines. This means that despite playing characters who share an incredibly close, tightly bonded friendship on screen, the core cast members frequently were not actually in the same room together while recording much of their dialogue, and the vast majority of the chemistry audiences feel between Alex, Marty, Melman, and Gloria was built later. Through the skill of the editors and animators who pieced together individual performances recorded independently into what feels like a cohesive, naturally flowing conversation. During these individual recording sessions, actors are also typically filmed on video while performing their lines, not for any kind of behind-the-scenes bonus feature, but specifically so that the animation team can study their real facial expressions, physical mannerisms, and comedic timing in order to inform how the animated characters ultimately move and emote on screen. Ben Stiller has spoken in interviews about how surprised he was to realize during his own recording sessions just how much he naturally gestures with his hands while performing, noticing for the first time how physically expressive his voice acting process actually was, even though none of those hand movements would ever be picked up by the microphone itself. This kind of self-discovery, actors becoming newly aware of their own physical performance habits while working purely in an audio recording booth, is a uniquely funny and revealing byproduct of the voice acting process that audiences rarely think about when watching a finished animated film. Because voice actors often record dozens of variations of the exact same line during a single session, trying out different tones, rhythms, and comedic deliveries so that the editing and animation teams have plenty of material to choose from later, recording sessions can become surprisingly long and repetitive affairs that sometimes stretch on for hours at a time, occasionally requiring actors to return to the booth on a completely separate day just to re-record or slightly adjust a single line of dialogue. David Schwimmer has described this recording process as an experience where actors try each line as many as 10 different ways, giving the creative team maximum flexibility when they later sit down to assemble complete scenes. This iterative, trial-and-error nature of the recording process naturally produced plenty of off-the-cuff, occasionally absurd or unexpectedly funny alternate takes throughout production, many of which never made it into the finished film but nonetheless became part of the informal, behind-the-scenes comedic folklore that circulated among the cast and crew throughout the years-long production process. One particularly memorable and, according to Ben Stiller himself, genuinely uncomfortable moment from the recording process involved a musical sequence in which Alex performs a rendition of the classic song New York, New York. Stiller has openly admitted in interviews that this particular recording session ranked among the more awkward and challenging moments of the entire production for him personally, largely because he does not consider himself a talented singer, and stepping into a small recording booth to belt out a well-known musical number without the benefit of a live audience, a band, or any of the usual trappings of a genuine musical performance left him feeling far more self-conscious than most of his comedic line readings throughout the rest of the film. This kind of candid admission from one of the film's biggest stars offers a fun glimpse into just how vulnerable and occasionally uncomfortable even the recording of a fairly brief musical joke within an animated comedy can feel from the actor's side of the microphone, a reminder that even seasoned comedic performers can find themselves genuinely nervous when asked to step slightly outside their usual comfort zone. Chris Rock, never one to shy away from a good joke about his own profession, has also been fairly candid and self-deprecating about the voice acting process over the years, memorably poking fun at just how deceptively simple animated voice work can appear from the outside. During a public appearance not long after Madagascar's release, Rock joked about the voice-over recording process in a way that captured a certain irreverent, tongue-in-cheek attitude that several members of the cast seemed to share about the job, describing it as walking into a booth, being told a line, repeating that line back, and then being paid handsomely for the trouble. While clearly exaggerated for comedic effect, since the reality of voice acting for a major animated feature involves far more nuance, repetition, and creative collaboration than Rock's joke suggests, the bit nonetheless reflects the genuinely relaxed, playful atmosphere that seemed to define much of the cast's overall attitude toward the project, treating the work with a light-hearted sense of fun even while investing real creative energy into shaping their characters over the course of the film's lengthy production schedule. Tom McGrath's own path to voicing Skipper the Penguin is itself one of the more amusing behind-the-scenes stories connected to the film's production. As co-director of Madagascar, McGrath was primarily focused on shaping the overall story, visual style, and comedic tone of the film rather than planning to voice any of its characters himself. However, during the early stages of production, before a permanent voice actor had been cast for Skipper, McGrath agreed to record some temporary placeholder dialogue for the character simply to help move the animation process along, fully expecting that his rough scratch recordings would eventually be replaced by a properly cast professional voice actor. Somewhere along the way, though, his gruff, no-nonsense line readings, reportedly influenced by tough guy performers he admired, resonated so strongly with the rest of the creative team that the decision was ultimately made to keep his voice in the finished film rather than replace it, turning what began as a temporary stopgap measure into one of the most recognizable and consistently reprised vocal performances across the entire Madagascar franchise. McGrath went on to voice Skipper not only throughout every subsequent Madagascar sequel but also across the character's various spin-off television series and feature films, all stemming from a recording session that was never originally intended to make it into the final movie at all. Beyond the recording booth, the animation and story development side of the production also produced its share of interesting creative choices and lighter moments worth highlighting. The overall visual style of the lush Madagascar jungle environments seen throughout the second half of the film was reportedly influenced by the paintings of the French post-impressionist artist Henri Rousseau, whose vivid, stylized depictions of dense tropical foliage and exotic wildlife helped inform the color palette and overall visual texture of the island setting. This kind of unexpected fine art influence quietly shaping the visual language of a mainstream, comedy-driven animated blockbuster reflects the surprising depth of creative reference material that animation teams often draw upon, even for films primarily built around slapstick humor and celebrity voice casting. Elsewhere in the film, the animation and effects teams built in a number of small, clever visual jokes designed as rewards for especially attentive viewers, including a moment during Alex's ocean crossing sequence where the shape of the sea foam surrounding his floating crate subtly forms the outline of a lion's face, complete with a mane created by the pattern of the foam itself. A detail so subtle that many viewers watching the film even multiple times might never consciously notice it. The film's musical score also came together through a bit of a last-minute swap that adds an interesting footnote to the production's overall history. Composer Harry Gregson Williams was originally attached to score Madagascar, but he was ultimately replaced by Hans Zimmer, who stepped in to compose the film's final musical score instead. In something of a strange coincidence, the exact opposite situation had occurred just a few weeks earlier on an entirely separate film, when Gregson Williams ended up replacing Zimmer as composer on the historical epic Kingdom of Heaven, meaning the two composers essentially swapped places across two different major studio productions being developed around the same time. A small but amusing bit of behind-the-scenes symmetry that composers and film score enthusiasts have often pointed to as one of the more curious coincidences of that particular Hollywood production season. The film's animators and writers also embedded a handful of playful references and inside jokes throughout the finished movie that reward close attention from fans. At one point during the sequence in which the penguins attempt to commandeer an oil tanker in order to continue their journey, a brief shot of a computer screen in the background displays text that spoofs a famous line from Shakespeare's Hamlet, cleverly reworked to reference the penguins themselves rather than the original line about mankind. Similarly, sharp-eyed viewers watching the Grand Central Station chase sequence may notice a brief but unmistakable sound effect known within the film industry as the Wilhelm scream, a now famous stock scream sound effect that has been reused across hundreds of films and television shows dating back decades, appearing here as the large crowd of frightened commuters goes charging up the stairs, believing they are being chased by an escaped lion. These kinds of small, embedded jokes and references reflect the layered sense of humor that the writing and animation teams built into the film, crafting material designed to entertain both the young children who made up much of the film's target audience and the more attentive adult viewers who might catch these hidden references on repeat viewings. Not every creative decision made during production was met with universal enthusiasm, however, and the film's development history includes at least one notable moment of internal disagreement among the studio's top decision-makers. Jeffrey Katzenberg, who served as one of the driving creative forces behind DreamWorks Animation throughout this era of the studio's history, has reportedly admitted in later interviews that he personally felt disappointed with how the film's third act ultimately came together, suggesting that even among the executives steering the studio through one of its most commercially successful periods, there remained genuine internal debate and lingering dissatisfaction about certain creative choices. Even for a film that would go on to perform so strongly at the box office and launch such an enduring franchise. This kind of candid, after-the-fact admission from a studio leader offers a fascinating glimpse into the reality that even hugely successful films rarely emerge from their production process with everyone on the creative team feeling entirely satisfied with every element of the finished product. Taken together, these stories about budget, development history, casting surprises, improvised performances, and the various quirks of the voice recording process paint a picture of a production that, despite its relatively modest budget compared to some of DreamWorks' later films, benefited enormously from a flexible, collaborative creative environment where actors were given real freedom to shape their characters, where a single improvised audition could completely reshape a character's role. In the finished story, and where small moments of spontaneous humor discovered in the recording booth were valued enough that the studio was willing to invest additional time and resources to preserve them in the final film. It is this willingness to embrace creative flexibility and genuine spontaneity throughout the filmmaking process that helps explain why Madagascar's humor still feels so alive and unpredictable even now, many years after its original release. Since so much of what audiences love about the film grew organically out of real moments of creative discovery rather than being locked into place long before any actor ever stepped up to a microphone. Madagascar arrived in theaters on May 27, 2005, landing squarely in the middle of one of the most competitive summer movie seasons of that entire decade. That particular summer saw audiences flocking to a wide range of major studio releases, and Madagascar had to carve out its own space in a marketplace filled with big-budget spectacle, releasing in the same general window as Star Wars, Episode III, Revenge of the Sith, one of the most anticipated films of the entire decade given the conclusion of the prequel trilogy. Despite facing this kind of intense competition for audience attention and box office dollars, Madagascar still managed to open in third place during its opening weekend, and remarkably, it climbed all the way to the top of the box office the following week, a rare feat for an animated family film going up against a marketplace dominated by blockbuster franchise filmmaking. This early box office performance set the tone for what would become an enormously successful theatrical run, one that eventually pushed the film's worldwide earnings past $550 million and made it the sixth highest-grossing film of the entire year, an impressive accomplishment when measured against every other major release of that particular Hollywood season. To understand why Madagascar's success mattered so much within the broader landscape of American animation history, it helps to look at the specific historical moment DreamWorks Animation found itself in the mid-2000s. DreamWorks had been founded roughly a decade earlier, in 1994, by three enormously influential figures in the entertainment industry: the filmmaker Steven Spielberg, the former Disney animation executive Jeffrey Katzenberg, and the music industry mogul David Geffen. The studio had already scored a massive cultural and commercial triumph with Shrek in 2001, a film that not only became a franchise unto itself but also helped define DreamWorks Animation's house style going forward, one built around fast-paced humor, celebrity voice casting, pop culture references, and a slightly more irreverent, less sentimental tone than what audiences had come to expect from the more classically structured, emotionally driven storytelling associated with Pixar and traditional Disney animation. Madagascar, releasing 4 years after Shrek's initial success, represented DreamWorks Animation's continued effort to build out an original, non-fairy tale-based property capable of anchoring its own franchise, and its success helped prove that the studio's particular comedic sensibility, driven heavily by star power and rapid-fire jokes rather than the more meticulously plotted emotional arcs Pixar had become known for, could translate into a second major, sustainable franchise beyond the world of Shrek. This period in animation history is often remembered by film historians and industry observers as a particularly interesting and competitive chapter in the ongoing rivalry between DreamWorks Animation and Pixar Animation Studios, two studios that, despite both working in computer-animated family filmmaking, approached their storytelling from noticeably different creative philosophies. Where Pixar films of this era, such as Finding Nemo and The Incredibles, tended to emphasize emotionally resonant, tightly constructed narratives grounded in universal themes about family, identity, and belonging, DreamWorks Animation films of the same period, including Madagascar, tended to lean more heavily into rapid-fire comedic set pieces. Celebrity voice performances clearly recognizable as the actors themselves rather than fully transformed characters, and a pop-culture-savvy sense of humor designed to appeal just as much to accompanying adults in the audience as to the children the films were nominally made for. This stylistic divide became one of the defining creative tensions of animated filmmaking throughout the 2000s, and Madagascar stands as one of the clearest examples of DreamWorks Animation's particular approach during this era, prioritizing big laughs, memorable needle-drop musical moments, and larger-than-life character performances over the kind of meticulously layered emotional storytelling Pixar had built its reputation on. Beyond its place within this broader industry rivalry, Madagascar also carries a fascinating layer of real-world historical and ecological context tied directly to the actual island nation the film is named after. The real Madagascar is the fourth largest island in the world, located in the Indian Ocean off the southeastern coast of the African continent, and it is home to an extraordinary level of biodiversity found almost nowhere else on the planet. Because Madagascar separated from the African mainland tens of millions of years ago and drifted into isolation, the species that evolved there did so largely independently from the rest of the world, resulting in an astonishing rate of endemism, meaning a huge percentage of Madagascar's plant and animal species exist nowhere else on Earth. Lemurs, the primates so central to the film's second half, are perhaps the most famous example of this evolutionary isolation, having arrived on the island as ancestral castaways millions of years ago before diversifying into more than 100 distinct species found across the island's varied habitats, ranging from lush rainforests to dry spiny forests filled with unusual cactus-like vegetation. The film's animators clearly drew on this real ecological diversity when designing the lush, vividly colored jungle environments of the island portion of the movie, and the choice to set an entire act of a major studio animated comedy on this particular island reflects a decision to highlight one of the most biologically unique and visually striking places on the planet. Even if the film itself takes enormous creative liberties with the tone and content of what audiences actually see once the characters arrive there. One particularly interesting piece of real-world historical trivia that adds an unexpectedly poignant layer to the film's lemur-centered storyline involves the actual social structure of real lemur communities, which differs in a fairly significant way from what the film portrays. In the movie, King Julian rules over his lemur subjects as an unquestioned monarch, complete with all of the trappings of a self-important male ruler surrounded by subjects who cater to his every whim. In reality, however, most lemur species, including the ring-tailed lemurs that King Julian is modeled after, actually live in matriarchal social structures, meaning that female lemurs, not males, hold the dominant social positions within their groups, receiving preferential access to food, prime resting spots, and other social privileges. Primatologists and conservationists who study these animals in the wild have noted, often with a good-natured sense of humor, that a scientifically accurate version of the film's ruling lemur character would actually have been a queen rather than a king. And this small but telling divergence between the film's comedic fiction and the real biological facts of lemur society has become a frequently cited talking point among conservation educators looking to use the film's popularity as an entry point for teaching young audiences about the actual social lives of these remarkable animals. The release of Madagascar also arrived at a moment when conservation organizations and scientists studying the real island nation saw a unique opportunity to leverage the film's massive cultural visibility for the benefit of real-world conservation efforts. In the lead-up to the film's release, organizations such as Conservation International recognized that a major Hollywood animated film bearing the country's name and prominently featuring its most famous wildlife had the potential to generate an enormous amount of free publicity and public interest in the island nation itself. Something that could be strategically used to support ecotourism development and broader conservation messaging around Madagascar's fragile ecosystems. Researchers at Duke University, home to one of the most respected primate research centers in the world, similarly expressed hope around the time of the film's release that its popularity would draw meaningful public attention to the real ecological crisis facing the island, since Madagascar's unique forests and the countless species that depend on them have been under severe and sustained threat from deforestation. Much of it driven by slash-and-burn agricultural practices tied to poverty among the island's human population. At the time the film was released, researchers estimated that a staggering percentage of Madagascar's original forest cover, sometimes cited as approaching 90%, had already been lost to farming, logging, and fire over the preceding centuries, placing enormous pressure on lemurs and countless other endemic species that depend entirely on those forest habitats for survival. Conservation scientists specifically studying the fossa, the predatory animal that serves as the film's antagonist species, similarly voiced hope that the movie's popularity might draw much-needed attention to the real ecological pressures facing that species and the broader ecosystem it inhabits, even while acknowledging that the fictional, cartoonish version of the fossa depicted in the film bears little resemblance to the far more elusive and ecologically vulnerable real animal. It is also worth noting, for the sake of historical accuracy and context, that the real Madagascar is very much a populated nation, home to tens of millions of people, a detail the film entirely omits in favor of depicting the island as an entirely untouched wilderness free of any human presence whatsoever. In reality, Madagascar has long been one of the poorer nations in the world by certain economic measures, with a significant portion of its population living on extremely limited daily income, and this economic reality is directly tied to many of the environmental pressures facing the island's wildlife. Since subsistence farming and other resource-dependent survival strategies among the human population have historically driven much of the deforestation threatening lemur habitats. While Madagascar, the film makes no attempt to engage with this socio-economic reality, instead presenting the island purely as an exotic, human-free wilderness playground for its zoo-raised animal characters. Conservation educators have found that this omission actually creates a valuable teaching opportunity, allowing them to use the gap between the film's fictional, human-free version of the island and the real, densely populated, economically complex nation as a springboard for deeper educational conversations about the actual challenges facing Madagascar's environment and its people. The film's massive box office success and cultural visibility also had a measurable, if somewhat unusual, ripple effect on public interest in the real animals it depicted, an effect that extended even into the world of American zoos and wildlife institutions. In the years following the original film's release, the Bronx Zoo in New York City opened a dedicated exhibit focused specifically on Madagascar's unique wildlife, allowing visitors to observe real lemurs and fossas in a setting clearly designed to capitalize on the cultural awareness the film had generated around these previously obscure animal species. Before the film's release, ring-tailed lemurs, fossas, and Madagascar's broader ecosystem existed largely outside of mainstream American popular culture, known mostly to specialists, dedicated wildlife enthusiasts, and those with a particular interest in unusual, evolutionarily isolated ecosystems. The film's massive commercial success effectively introduced an entire generation of young viewers to these animals for the first time, and the cultural footprint of that introduction proved durable enough that, years later, when an entirely separate, non-animated documentary film called Island of Lemurs, Madagascar was released in a large-format IMAX theatrical presentation narrated by the actor Morgan Freeman, filmmakers and primatologists involved with that documentary project openly acknowledged that the animated Madagascar franchise had done an enormous amount to raise general public awareness of lemurs as a species, even joking, much like the earlier conservation researchers, that they wished the fictional King Julian had been portrayed as a queen instead, in keeping with the real matriarchal social structure of most lemur species. Beyond its ecological and conservation-related cultural footprint, Madagascar also left a lasting mark on mainstream popular culture through its music, particularly through Sacha Baron Cohen's memorable cover performance of the song I Like to Move It, originally performed by the group Real to Real. Cohen's rendition of the song, delivered in character as King Julian during one of the film's most memorable and energetic sequences, became such a defining piece of the franchise's identity that it went on to serve as a recurring musical theme throughout every subsequent Madagascar film and television spin-off, cementing its place as one of the most recognizable and enduring needle-drop moments in modern animated film history. The song's popularity extended well beyond the context of the film itself, becoming something of a cultural touchstone in its own right, frequently referenced, remixed, and repurposed across various forms of media and internet culture in the years since the film's original release, to the point where many younger listeners today associate the song primarily with King Julian and the Madagascar franchise rather than with its original 1990s dance music origins. The commercial success of the original film also permanently reshaped DreamWorks Animation's business strategy going forward, transforming Madagascar from a standalone film into the foundation of one of the studio's most enduring and expansive multimedia franchises. In the years following the original release, the franchise expanded to include two direct theatrical sequels, Madagascar, Escape to Africa in 2008 and Madagascar 3, Europe's Most Wanted in 2012, both of which continued to build on the established comedic dynamics of the original film's core cast while introducing new settings, new supporting characters, and increasingly elaborate set pieces. The franchise's most popular supporting characters, the militaristic penguin squad, originally introduced almost as a secondary subplot in the first film, proved so popular with audiences that they eventually received their own dedicated feature film, Penguins of Madagascar, released in 2014, along with an entire spin-off television series, The Penguins of Madagascar, that ran across multiple seasons and further expanded the comedic universe built around Skipper, Kowalski, Rico, and Private King Julian. Similarly proved popular enough to warrant his own dedicated spin-off series, All Hail King Julian, which explored the character's backstory and expanded Lemur Kingdom mythology in far greater detail than the relatively brief screen time available to him within the original theatrical films. Beyond television and film, the Madagascar franchise's cultural reach eventually extended into live stage shows and theme park attractions, further demonstrating just how thoroughly the original 2005 film had embedded itself into mainstream family entertainment culture over the course of the following decade and beyond. Examining the film's critical reception at the time of its original release also offers an interesting window into how animated family comedies were evaluated by professional critics during this particular era of Hollywood filmmaking. Madagascar received what could accurately be described as a mixed critical reception upon its initial release, with many reviewers praising the film's vibrant visual style, its charming character designs, and its genuinely funny individual comedic moments, while simultaneously criticizing certain aspects of its overall narrative structure and pacing, particularly in the film's back half once the central characters arrive on the island itself. This somewhat divided critical response reflects a broader pattern seen across much of DreamWorks Animation's output during this period, in which critics often responded warmly to the studio's visual craftsmanship and comedic energy while expressing more reservations about the underlying narrative depth and emotional coherence of the films compared to the more critically consistent output coming from Pixar during roughly the same stretch of years. Despite this somewhat mixed critical reception, audience response to the film proved overwhelmingly positive, as reflected clearly in its enormous box office performance, illustrating a pattern that would repeat itself throughout much of the 2000s, in which certain DreamWorks Animation films managed to achieve massive commercial success and lasting cultural popularity even in the face of more lukewarm reviews from professional film critics. Even DreamWorks Animation's own leadership acknowledged some degree of internal creative dissatisfaction with certain elements of the finished film, reflecting the broader tension between commercial success and artistic satisfaction that so often characterizes major studio filmmaking. Studio executive Jeffrey Katzenberg, who played a central role in shaping DreamWorks Animation's creative direction throughout this era, has reportedly expressed disappointment in later years with how the film's third act ultimately came together, an admission that offers a fascinating historical footnote regarding the internal creative culture at the studio during this particular period. This kind of candid retrospective acknowledgement from a major studio leader, made about a film that nonetheless went on to become one of the most commercially successful and culturally influential releases of its year, speaks to the often complicated relationship between financial success and creative satisfaction within the film industry, where a project can simultaneously achieve enormous popular and commercial validation while still leaving key decision-makers feeling that certain creative elements fell short of their original ambitions. Madagascar's cultural and historical significance ultimately extends well beyond its immediate box office performance, or even its lasting franchise legacy, touching on broader questions about how popular entertainment intersects with real-world science, conservation, and public awareness of the natural world. Few animated comedies of the mid-2000s managed to leave as tangible a mark on public consciousness regarding a specific real-world location and its unique wildlife as Madagascar did, introducing millions of young viewers to lemurs, fossas, and the broader ecological wonder of an island nation that most casual moviegoers likely knew little to nothing about before the film's release. At the same time, the film's massive commercial success helped cement DreamWorks Animation's identity as a major creative and commercial force within the animation industry throughout the 2000s, establishing a second flagship franchise beyond Shrek and demonstrating that the studio's particular blend of celebrity-driven comedy, memorable musical moments, and irreverent humor could resonate with global audiences at a scale rivaling the very best that the animation industry had to offer. During this particularly competitive and creatively fertile chapter in Hollywood's ongoing history with computer-animated filmmaking. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the cultural and historical details behind Madagascar, make sure you hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves this movie as much as you do, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next deep dive.